The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Good evening, I'm Joe Doolittle.
Good morning, I'm Kate Dudding.
And good afternoon, and this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience.
And Kate Dudding and I are storytellers.
And producers of storytelling events.
And kind of interested in storytelling in a lot of different ways. And we're going to spend an hour with you, if you'll spend an hour with us, sharing some stories and sharing some ideas about stories and sharing some events that feature storytelling right here in the Capital District.
And a guest storyteller.
That's how we're going to do some of it, a guest storyteller, who we'll introduce in a moment. But, you know, we've had November was a big month, and December was kind of a fun month for storytelling. What's the most fun you've had storytelling lately?
I heard that my latest CD is going to get a National Storytelling Award.
Wow, that's pretty good.
But I don't know what yet, so...
Wait a minute, you're going to get an award, but you don't know what it is?
Yes, they ask for it's announced in a magazine in March, so you get sent the copy of the details about your CD or book.
And this is a CD about women?
Women in the mid-20th century fighting for our rights.
Wow. Well, that ought to get an award.
So I don't know if it's for the whole CD or for one particular story.
You know, I have a friend that has a TV show on public access television, and you ought to be interviewed about that story sometime, that book, that CD.
Oh.
Oh, we'll do that sometime. We'll do that sometime. That'd be good. And I haven't had any bad times with storytelling, but it's probably my most fun things is it's a group we're going to talk about a little bit at Arthur's Market in Schenectady. On the first Tuesday, we started an open mic for spoken word and music, and we get a wonderful gathering of very interested performers and people, and we encourage you to try it. And we had just a really fun time with Joe Peck, who was the featured storyteller. And what's nice about Joe Peck is he brings artifacts from his stories. So he told a Christmas story, and he told a story about the time he got a John Deere tractor, a toy tractor that he really wanted, and then he reached into this bag, this velvet bag, and he had this toy tractor right there. And it was just perfect, just perfect.
Which reminds me of, I got a bunny for Easter when I was 2.5.
Okay.
And there's a picture of me holding Bunny with my older brother and my mother and my father by my grandparents' home. Bunny is over 60 years old now, and Bunny is not really fluffy anymore.
Not fluffy anymore.
No. And an acquaintance came over, and for some reason Bunny came up, so I went and got Bunny. Bunny has replacement eyes and replacement whiskers, and the music box is fine. And this acquaintance said, "Oh, well, you know, you could cut the music box out and put it in something else." And I went, "Oh,
do a lobectomy on Bunny? Oh my.
It was just horrifying.
Now we've just engaged in a little bit of light storytelling, and we're interested in method. And stories, to have kind of any structure at all, need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And your story about Bunny, it had the bunny, had the terror of having the surgery on the stuffed bunny, and then had some resolution where the friend gave up the idea entirely. But so be mindful that stories are all around us, because when we first mention stories, you say, oh, stories are kind of formal or they're fairy tales. Stories are really us. They're the way we talk and the way we act. And if you tune them up with a little bit of definition, they can be entertaining and they can be elements that teach. And perhaps for storytelling around your own families, there'll be stories that people remember and moments that they remember. So that's what storytelling really is. It's about us.
And it's, well, sharing the human experience.
That's right.
That, namaste, I recognize
You and you recognize me.
me and the holiness in you and the holy. Stories are the way we connect.
Yeah. And actually, we ought to kind of introduce our guest because he's one of the best connectors that we know in our Guild of Storyteller. It's Sandy Schuman who's with us today. And Sandy professionally has been an artful public servant. He's a great group facilitator. And Sandy, you've done all of storytelling great yeoman's duty with your most recent work in publishing this anthology of our local story circles. So we welcome you today and are so glad you're here with us. It's a little snowy outside for those of you who aren't up on the weather quite in the winter. So great.
Nice to be here. And I was wondering how long it would take you to get around to mentioning the book.
The book. Well, or mentioning you.
Well,
Yes, or the book.
It's been about, I think I'm in the third sentence about you, so that's pretty good.
There are acts of love, and then there's book publishing.
But there also might be it seemed like a good idea at the time kind of thing too. But he survived.
Right.
So we'll yes.
Sandy has a weakness. He is a volunteer. And one day this fall, in the course of a conversation, earlier than that, in the course of a conversation at one of our Story Circle meetings, the third week of the month, either a Tuesday or Wednesday, check our website. What did you say, kind of?
Are you talking about the inception of the book?
Yes, I am talking about the inception of the book.
Okay, that was last April.
Last April.
Last April. I don't remember. What did I say? I floated the idea of,
Yeah, have you ever thought about...
Yeah.
I remember keeping my hand down and kind of trying that invisible, the cloak of invisibility trying to, encompass me.
Well, and then you follow that up with a serious web, email.
Right. I sent an email to the Story Circle of the Capital District list and just kind of floated the idea. And, more than 20 people responded and said, yeah, they'd be interested depending on the particulars. And so to avoid flooding the regular Story Circle listserv with all these emails, we created a separate one just for this Storytellers Anthology project, which now, of course, has a website, storytellersanthology.com, and continued the discussion. Some people joined who hadn't initially expressed interest.
Some people who had their hands down initially.
Yes,
right.
yes.
Right. And some people who initially thought they could do it decided that they couldn't, the timing wasn't right, whatever. But 8 months later,
there it is.
Here's the book, Stories We Tell, Tales from the Story Circle of the Capital District. 20 of our local storytellers putting into print stories that they have told, and I think a total of 31 stories altogether.
Wow. And it was fun to do for most of us, I guess.
I think it was fun for everybody.
I think it was actually, and the list serve that you set up of the contributors, as most listservs, if they're productive, do, got to be kind of a family conversation, and people really said what they didn't like and what they did like, and it was a trip, really.
The family analogy, yes, meaning to say that some things were said that you wouldn't normally expect to come across an email, but we're honest, we're to the point, and express one preference or another. And as I'm sure you recall, this was book publication by survey. There were a number of issues that we talked about, via email. But then when it came time to really come to a decision, we conducted a survey. So we had a survey for the title, for the subtitle.
Images was that a survey? Whether we should include images in the stories or not?
Right, and we ended up, we did include images. Some people had images that went along with their stories, and I think at the somewhat ridiculous level, but it still paid off. It was, which font should we use for the title? And some
on the
people,
cover.
Right, on the cover. Some people preferred one font, some people preferred the other. It wasn't really clear. So we did another survey. Most everybody weighed in, and then the results were clear. Most people preferred the, I can't remember, I think that's the papyrus font. And
that's very symbolic.
Is it?
Papyrus, a method of writing
Early writing.
stories?
Early writing.
Oh, that was... We just did it on looks, though, really.
That's right. It had the right look.
Well, some of us who are historical in our observations probably realized that was the context of the papyrus font. Now you don't believe that, do you? Okay.
No, sorry.
Now, would you like to? Now this is one of the real issues that happened was the conversion of a spoken story that may have been written down in a casual way to literature. I had some difficulty with that, I know. So do you want to read us a story, or are you going to tell us a story? Because you're a storyteller when you come right down to it.
Well, as fate would have it, the story that's in this book that I contributed is a story that I've already told on this show.
Oh.
It's hard to tell a hug. So you can look up the story on the YouTube channel. But with respect to that story, and you're talking about the process of converting a told story into a written story, an experience I had on that story was that the introduction, which I have used many times, I'm pretty sure it's the same introduction that I used when I told the story on this show. It's, in a prehistoric time, a small band left the village to forage for food. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And they wandered further than they ever had from their camp. They came to a steep ravine. And before they started to climb down one side and then they would have to climb up the other, one of the group motioned everybody over, and they lifted this tree that had fallen, and they stood it up on end, and they let it fall, and it crossed the ravine, and they all walked across that tree. It was the first bridge. And as they were walking across, one of them broke off a branch and kept it as a walking stick. It was the first walking stick, and soon everybody had picked up their own walking stick, and they proceeded. Finally, they came to a patch of berries, and they filled their pouches with the berries, and one of them was attacked by a bear. And they all started to run away, but one of them took the stick and beat the bear, and they all came with their sticks, and they beat the bear, and they saved their fellow. And they headed home, but they were lost. They didn't know which way to go. One of them had an idea, climbed a tall tree. She could see the camp in the distance and pointed the way. When finally they got back to camp, they so wanted to tell the story that they invented language. Well, I love that introduction for this story. I've used it many times, and I conclude that introduction in the story with, we're humans, we're storytellers. Everybody is a storyteller. Well, later on, shortly thereafter, I go on to say, my father was a storyteller, but my mother was not. And somebody, I think it was Joe Doolittle, made the comment that, here in one paragraph you say everybody's a storyteller, in the next paragraph you say your father was a storyteller, but your mother was not. Sounds contradictory. Maybe you should change that. And then somebody else made a comment that, this is a nice story. It's a general story about storytelling. It doesn't really connect with what follows. which is very personal. It focuses on your mother. And, I was disappointed. I loved that introduction. So I kind of stewed on that for a while and ended up making a change and changing that introduction so that it more directly fed into the rest of the story. And it omitted that line about everybody is a storyteller, because clearly I'm saying my mother was not.
I remember that exchange of emails now.
I
feel a little rough now. But I do like the introduction. At the same time, the point was it was an observation.
But that's what you've cut out is fine all by itself. When Dan Ketting was here for the Riverway Storytelling Festival, now defunct, in his workshop, that was one of his points. You have to prune your stories, but what you prune out could be something of, in and of itself. And if you're going to be on, let's say, television or radio, they just want something little. They don't want an 11-minute story. So do not throw it away.
Right. It is a 2-minute story, and I have used it as a standalone story, as a way to introduce storytelling, and I think it holds up by itself. It just wasn't, on reflection, the right introduction for this particular story. So that sort of was my story about the process, as you mentioned, Joe, of turning a told story into a written story, getting feedback from others, and struggling with, okay, what do I do with that feedback? Do I make a change? What change do I make? And I thought maybe you guys might have some comments along those lines as well.
Well,
now I'm doing the interviewing.
One of my stories was a newish story about a young American soldier who was Muslim. And when I got to the point of, after serving in Iraq for 4 months, he got a furlough to come home to celebrate the end of Ramadan. His family was not expecting to see him, blah, 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 blah. And Marnie Gillard, now, I have to say, when you set up the review process, I was somewhere between surprised and appalled. Because first, 3 people would review the written copy, and then you wanted a group meeting, or 2 group meetings, you could go to either one, where you would read your story out loud, and the people, the 8, 9, 10 people there would make comments on it after the initial process where you might have made some changes. I'm going, oh. But this was Sandy's project. I was not going to say, Sandy's done things, so I wasn't going to stick my nose in where it didn't belong. Well, it turns out at the final review, the face-to-face review, Marnie Gillard suggested, I think you need, after you say he's coming home to celebrate the end of Ramadan, you need something, just a little bit about what that means to Muslims. She said, you don't need to say, observing Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and they they fast from water and food, blah, 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 blah. You don't need all that. Just say something like, Muslim families gather together the same to celebrate the end of Ramadan, the way other families get together to celebrate Passover or Christmas. I went, I didn't have as much reluctance because this was a new story, and sometimes it's easier to be receive improvements or suggestions. And then I had a final review with Elizabeth Ellis, who is an internationally known storyteller. And she said, by the way, that sentence about Muslim families gather together the same way other families, she said, that was really good. That just, and I fessed up that Marnie had suggested that. So that was, and if you hadn't had that, elaborate review process, a multi-stage review process. I don't think I would have gotten that remark.
Well, it's similar to a bit. I had 2 family stories, short ones, and the sequencing of words that I got feedback on, because I had a certain pattern that when you speak it might work, and it didn't kind of work when you were doing the written thing, and I just never would have caught that. And the other thing I thought was really helpful, in addition to the face-to-face, which was also an opportunity to get us all together, which kind of was fun, was that decision to have a professional editor look at the stories. And when I first saw that, I said, gee whiz, we've just grilled these things to tears, you know? I mean, we don't, you know? But then we kind of decided to spend some money on that to get a professional to look at it. And that was really a very remarkable thing, because the things that she noticed from, I'd say, from the 90% level of performance in the story up to 98 was really remarkable. And I thought it was pretty good the way it was. So that was kudos to you, old publisher.
Well, I was glad to have somebody who knew exactly where the commas should go,
Right.
not approximately. And one thing I just remembered that what I believe you suggested, that when I was telling it, I always would say, Mosen's father said, and then give the speech. And then Mosen's brother said, Mosen is the name of the young soldier, Mosen Nakvi. But you turned it around to the print version of, we are proud to be Americans, comma, end of double quotes. Mosen's father said, period. Open double quotes, and then going on with the speech. And the third time I saw that, I stopped being annoyed and went, oh, right, that's the written way to do it. But when you're telling it, I think you have to start out with who's talking, so that the listener will know who's talking. The listeners can't back up. Well, if you're on a tape, you can. Not so much on the CD. You have to go back to the beginning of the. But so yeah, there are really written conventions. There are oral conventions, and.
Right, and not the least of which is in terms of written conventions. From the reader's standpoint, the reader expects certain things to mean the same thing. That's really very abstract. Very specific example. When you're telling a story, it's easy to pause for dramatic effect or otherwise, and then continue. But the reader doesn't have that. So we use things like commas. One writer might use a comma. Another writer might use ellipsis points, you know, the 3 little dots. Somebody else might use a hyphen or a dash or a long dash with or without spaces before and after the dashes. I mean, there's all these different ways of punctuating pauses that you want to convey to the reader. Well, in a collection, you want to use the same code. And so one of the things that our editor did was, okay, we're going to use a manual of style that says this is how you do it, and we're going to apply those punctuation codes, if you will, uniformly throughout, so that the reader gets the idea.
Now, on the flip side of that, I've noticed that some new tellers, they just kind of plow through the story, and they're usually starting from a written version, and they don't pause between paragraphs. So your listener is trying to keep up, but it's like, now where are we? And so occasionally I've said to new tellers, you need to think about pausing at the end of a paragraph or at the end of a section to let your listeners also come to the end before you change directions.
Right, and in the book, that sometimes shows up as simply, well, of course there are paragraphs, but then it's just there. It's not the sort of thing I think that readers necessarily notice, but there are some paragraphs that have an extra space before them. so as to just give a little separation, a little pause between the previous section and this section.
In a play, that would be new scene.
Right. Actually, there's another convention that I think shows up in the book, which is, there's a line with 3 asterisks. So that's a bigger scene change. It's just this
New act.
subtle conveying of transition.
But of course, the tone of voice, I think, was the hardest. The tone of voice and the body language.
It's hard to do that in a book.
It's hard to do that. It was easy when I was doing one story of, and then she ended up with a ball of yarn this big. Well, this big, I'm going, the size of a grapefruit was what I did in the written version. That was easy, but the, you can say she was that kind of mother, or you could say she was that kind of mother. And translating that to the written, not that that's an example from the book, but that's tough.
Now we're proud of this book, obviously, and we just had it hot off the press delivered to us, and we're planning to have some parties about the book, kind of a book release party. And the first of these is one that's going to happen on January 6th, which is the first Tuesday of January, at Arthur's Market in the historic Stockade neighborhood of Schenectady. And that's also the place we have an open mic. And we have 3 of the authors in the anthology. They're either reading or telling their stories. And there's some really interesting mix of folks. It's Kent Bushman, who's a dear friend of ours and of storytelling, with a story that's there on the lost tools of Schoharie. And it's a
story he told here.
That's right, and it's a keeper regionally for all the things that have happened, bad and good, in Schoharie. Janet Carter, who's also been on this show, who's down in Saugerties, and she'll be with us, and she's not come up for many performances here, so that's going to be fun. And then Maggie Whalen will be here, and Maggie Whalen is a wonderful Irish mother and grandmother, and she's got some family stories that will just bring smiles on one side of your face and tears down your cheek on the other side of your face. And one of them deals with Elmo and Christmas. So that's going to be...
And that's really very heartfelt. Though from those 2 little details, I'm sure you're wondering how, but trust us. It's
and if you
a
want to,
lovely story.
The books will be available for sale, and there'll be things to buy to eat and drink at Arthur's. It's a coffee house. And also there'll be a range of other performers, storytellers. Glenda Luck, who is a friend of mine, who's a folk singer and a composer, will be there with her guitar, and many other interesting folks just show up. So it's a balmy evening at Arthur's for open mic, and this one's going to be special because it's going to be a party about the book.
And you can park a couple of blocks away in the First Reformed Church parking lot,
which is on Church Street and Front Street if you're looking for markers in the stockade. That's just a short block down to Ferry and Front Street, which is where Arthur's is, and where Lawrence the Indian, the statue of the Mohawk chief that sits in Schenectady, is right out the window.
And since we've started with coming events,
why
don't we just continue on? That was the first one, being the first Tuesday. That usually has that honor. Then we have our storytelling open mic up in Saratoga Springs on the second Wednesday of the month. This month, it's at Cafe Lena. We alternate between that and another location. And we have a featured teller of Kelvin Caraga from the Greenwich, Cambridge area. He's an actor, a storyteller, and an organizer of storytelling events at Hubbard Hall.
Oh, what fun. Yeah, he's going to be good.
Yes.
That's fun. That's good.
Yes.
And that's another wonderful place to listen to stories at Cafe Lena. Just a great venue for being together as a group of listeners and as a storyteller. So join us.
And that has one rule: you must tell the story, you can't read it. At the first Tuesdays, it's spoken word, reading is allowed. Then 2 days later, down in Saugerties, which is really only an hour from my home in Clifton Park, so it's less from people living in Albany or certainly south of there, Janet Carter, as Joe mentioned, organizes storytelling at the Inquiring Minds bookstore in the center of Saugerties, now on the third Friday of every month. And on Friday, January 16th at 7 p.m., she'll have Jim Hawkins. You don't have to wait for March for A Touch of the Irish. He's a storyteller from downstate. And then 2 days later, at Proctor's, we have our third word plays of this 8th season, all stories about being locked out.
Locked out as in not able to get in, right?
Yes, and it could be physically or metaphorically.
Ooh, metaphorically?
Metaphorically.
Oh, man, you know what? Once you start to write books, you begin to use the language a little differently.
It's a 5-syllable word. I know others. Prestidigitation is my favorite word. And that has many more.
Once you get her started.
Prestidigitation.
Okay,
That's 6.
Oh, okay.
But back to Locked Out. You're telling, I'm telling, Sandy's telling. And 3-4 other wonderful people.
And the Sunday afternoon performances at Proctor's, that is also the location for the Schenectady Green Market. And there are all sorts of farm and craft and other kinds of vendors in Proctor's Robb Alley and downstairs in the lower level. And you can find all sorts of things. There's about 4 restaurants who are visible, so you can get lunch. You can get lunch, and you don't have to worry about
Cerealison
getting dessert because we serve dessert at intermission.
is our...
So come to the Green Market and graze your way through to word plays and join us for a lively afternoon and some intermission food.
Yeah, just as the Green Market ends at 2, we start upstairs at the Fenimore Gallery, just 1 floor up from the box office.
Tickets at the Proctor's box office.
Yes, and then our next Story Circle meeting is here at Colonie Town Library on Tuesday, January 20th, starting at 6:30. And we share stories under development, and I've had great suggestions have been made over the years to various stories that I've been developing from my fellow storytellers. And again, telling, no reading. And listeners are welcome. Storytellers need listeners, otherwise you just kind of...
That's right.
Talking aloud to yourself, which is still...
Can't tell a story without a listener.
Right. And then to end January, on Sunday, January 25th, we have, it's Joe Doolittle again, with his 2 cronies, Harlan Ratmeyer and Kent Bushman, 3 spirits, listening to the whisper. So you get 3 courses of food interwoven with 4 courses of story.
And this is a kind of an annual event. Last year we had a benefit for the Hamilton Hill Art Center and their jazz band, and the Keystone story was actually one that Sandy told that responded to an article in the paper, and Sandy donating a saxophone to the efforts of organizing a New Orleans jazz band, a street band. So last year at the same performance, we had the jazz band, we had Sandy, and we had a big blowout at the end. So since we were so loud and boisterous last year, we decided to go a little quieter. And this year's theme is listening to the whisper, that little voice of conscience or call or love or betrayal that hangs out in your your ears or your heart. And it's going to be a wonderful evening, and we encourage you to come. And it also ties to another benefit that I'm involved with. And in our Reformed church in the area, we have 5 young and not so young people in divinity school. And we're committed to pay their tuition. And with 5, that's become kind of an interesting challenge. So any funds for this will go to support the scholarship fund of Schenectady classes of the Reformed Church. There you go.
And this is our 112th Story Sunday. We're in our 16th season. We got to be doing something right.
Well, it's just a good combination, and we're grateful to the folks at the Glenn Sanders Mansion for treating us and our listeners so well with just accommodations and fine food, and we actually have our own bartender.
Yes.
You know, I things I never thought we'd have. But we have our own. Rick is our bartender, and he shows up very religiously to take care of us.
And if you would like to discuss wines with him,
That's right.
he
He's
does
very
that with
good.
my husband. Yes.
We might do a wine and chocolate party again with Rick as the sommelier. We could do that. We should do that.
And then Sandy mentioned this. We have a YouTube channel. One way of accessing it is going to Story Circle at proctors.org and clicking on YouTube. And I've organized them under 5 different categories. Humorous, traditional, personal, historical, literary. There we go.
Literary.
And so we have about 140 stories there now. So if you're excited about storytelling and you tell somebody about it and they don't understand, point them to our YouTube channel and maybe they'll get an idea. But however wonderful these stories are on the YouTube channel, it's not the same as being in a live audience where you and the storyteller are connecting. And if I see somebody nodding when I'm telling a story, I go, you understand, good. Or we're together in the journey of the story. And that's why I love storytelling. I love theater. I'm a subscriber to Capital Rep. But storytelling is a personal art form. It combines the intensity of a solo performer with the intimacy of a one-on-one conversation. So, I'll jump off my storytelling evangelist soapbox. And
I had just one more that I would like to slip in, which is it's a new venue that we've launched in Albany starting January 9th. It's at the Irish American Heritage Museum, and it's at 7 o'clock on January 9th, and it's called Shawnee Eves. And Shawnee is an Irish Celtic storyteller, one of the vagabond storyteller troubadours who traveled around and shared stories. And we're using that as our theme, and we hope to have it the second Friday of every month. The museum is down on the University Plaza, right across from the old D&H building, which is now the headquarters for the State University, in a wonderful space with a library and ways to do research on Irish immigrants and Irish immigration, and exhibits. And one of their exhibits is about Irishtown. And Irishtown was a lumber camp in the Adirondacks. And our theme is stories and songs of Irishtown and Adirondack lore, and it's myself and Dan Berggren, who's known to folks here, who's a folk singer and a composer, and he grew up next door to Irishtown in Minerva, and all this is not a very big area. So we've got some home roots. There's a display and pictures about the circumstances about that Irish community starting there, and it's still there, and that's one of the nice things about it. In February, we've got Karen Pillsworth and Lorraine Harden-Gillardy from down in Kingston. They organize another program of Irish culture called the Hoolie on Labor Day weekend in Kingston, and they'll be telling. Marnie Gillard and Mary Murphy, who are local tellers, but very Irish in the way they look at the world. They're on near St. Pat's, and after that, it's
April,
and it's the lady that does the writer.
Barbara McCarthy.
No, the lady, the author, Jean something Ross.
Oh,
Eileen Mack.
Eileen Mack on Jean Roberts.
Roberts.
Foster Roberts. Roberts Foster.
I'm sorry for apologize to Eileen for that. Fascinating story about a woman who grew up in the scraggly nature of the Adirondacks and went on to fame and fortune as a literary presence in New York City, Boston, and the Adirondacks.
She is acclaimed for doing this program.
Yeah.
So it's not that, like the others. Let's get that foot out.
All right, that's coming up, and we'll keep that out there. And it's for those of you on the Albany side of the community, it's an opportunity to listen. So there you go.
Excellent. So.
Well, you've mentioned Arthur's now a couple of times, and I wanted to update you on something that happened at Arthur's.
Arthur's.
When I was at Arthur's last April, it was April 1st because it was, I think you billed it as April Fools or Adirondack Fools, something like that. And I was the featured teller. And I started off by playing my theme song, which I do not play on the saxophone. I played on the trump, better known as the Jew's harp. So I played my theme song, which goes like this. And
Theme song.
that was my theme song. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've always admired your musical ability.
As well you should.
And the dramatic pause at the end. You notice that too.
It's,
Yes.
You know, the rests are as important as the notes. At any rate, I then went on to talk a bit about the Jew's harp and its origins. And after the program, one of the women who was in the audience said, you know, do they always look like this? You can't see that very well. This is rather triangular looking. You know, do they have other shapes? And I said, yes. You know, sometimes the more common shape, in fact, has this rounded end. And she said, you know, I might have some old Jew's harps. And right away my eyes lit up because you may not know, but way back in the 19th century, one of the very prominent areas of Jew's harp production was in Rowley Village, England. This is a sort of central England near Birmingham. And booming business. And it was a sort of a cottage industry. Apparently, one of the Smith brothers, one of the Smith family that was a Jew's harp producer, came to America, settled in either Rensselaer or Troy, not sure which, and produced Jew's harps for decades, well into the 20th century. And among Jew's harp players around the world, the J.R. Smith Jew's harp is renowned, you know, collector's item. Very good quality Jew's harp. And so I talked with her, and she said, well, I don't know if, you know, there's anything to indicate J.R. Smith. At any rate, I made arrangements to visit her. I stopped over at her house. It was Georgette Cartwright. And she pulls out these two Jew's harps, and they are the more traditional shape. And I look carefully on the arm to see if there's an imprint. Well, you know, it looks like something, but you can't quite make that out. I look at the other one, and behold, it says in plain lettering, J.R. Smith, a genuine J.R. Smith Jew's harp. And you look more carefully at the other one, and you can see it's not stamped as clearly, but you are now about to hear the melodious sounds of the J.R.
Of
Smith
the
Jews harp.
famous regionally made national Jews harp, internationally acclaimed.
That's
Jews
right. That's right. And it is a good sound. I hope that the
You just do
microphone
it
is picking
once?
that up. Well, don't encourage me.
Whoa!
Yes.
Maestro.
Rossini would be proud.
I was going to say, man, I'll tell you, I was about to get the bow and arrow out and shoot. I mean, no.
Or Hi-Ho Silver.
Hi-Ho
from
Silver.
Hi-ho silver away, right. Okay, so there's our local Jews harp story.
That came to pass because of Arthur's.
Right. It's all on account of Arthur's.
Well,
And who knows, there are undoubtedly other people who have these weird-looking instruments sitting in a drawer, not knowing that they possess the world-renowned J.R. Smith Jews harp from Troy or Rensselaer, New York. I'm still working on that piece of research. But
that'll be part of the next book. Oh.
Now, in the William Tell Overture, your fingers were going pretty fast there. I mean, did you take lessons?
Okay, this is like, don't encourage me. This is the story of Gerald McCloy and the strange things that happened to that little boy. They say it all started when Gerald was 2. That's the age kids start talking, at least most of them do. But when he started talking, do you know what he said? He didn't say words, he said instead. That's the beginning of a Dr. Seuss story called Gerald McBoing Boing. And I hadn't thought about that in a long time, but then I made the connection to the Jews harp sound and a very early recollection of that book and a recording of that book. It was actually first a recording, then they made a book out of it. And I called my sisters to say if they remembered this book. And I remember talking to my sister Selma, and I said, do you remember that book? And she started reciting it.
Oh, really?
She said, I know the whole book by heart. I read that book to you so many times. I know the whole thing by heart. At any rate, I was a few years old when my sister is reading this book to me, and I'm listening to the recording and hearing the sound, and fell in love with the sound. And then a few years later, there was a TV show that I liked to watch called Andy's Gang, and there was a puppet character on this show called Froggy the Gremlin. And Andy Devine, who was the host of the show, would call Froggy to presence by saying, "Pluck your magic twanger, Froggy," and Froggy would appear. So that was my second introduction to this. And then, probably junior high school age, I listened on WOR radio to Gene Shepard. All the Gene Shepard fans out there will smile. And in the course of this rambling kind of storytelling 45-minute spoken word program, what we would now call spoken word program, but he's just talking. He would play his theme song, and along with the theme song, and at other times, he'd pull out this Jews harp. And then at some point in high school, I acquired a Jews harp, not really easy to come by. And waiting for the bus to get home from school, I figured out how to play the Jews harp. There was no kind of instruction available. much different today. The Jews harp is undergoing a revival. There's an International Jews Harp Society. There's every other year there's an International Jews Harp Congress. There are many manufacturers now, mostly in Europe, making Jews harps. There are a few in the United States. And you look on YouTube and you can get instructional videos, all sorts of things. That particular technique, typically a Jews harp is played this way. And you can do all sorts of things with it. Like I said, don't encourage me. But that particular technique, which is like this, I saw in a YouTube video, and it's also good for the theme song from Bonanza.
Really?
It's very, very good.
Boom, 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 boom,
right.
boom.
So you can go home and practice.
I will.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my lessons now come from YouTube, as do all lessons.
All lessons.
Almost anything you want, and many that you don't. All right.
Well, we'll do a YouTube video on how to publish a story anthology, right?
There was an article in the front page of the local section of the Gazette that a young magician coming home from a show got stopped by the Scotia police for speeding 45 in a 30-mile district late Saturday night. And when they saw his regalia in the back seat, they asked him what he did, and he told them. And so they had already decided, I think, not to ticket him because he lives in the village. They don't tend to do that often. And so then they asked him for a card trick. So he said, I'd love to do it, but will you put it on your camera? So he went over to the front hood of the police car, and I guess that since it's been posted on Sunday, it's already had 250,000 hits of this kid doing the card trick show for the Scotia police on YouTube.
Well, given the current stories about...
It's a lot lighter thing. That's
Yes.
true. That's true.
And something that came to my mailbox yesterday was from the Moton Museum in Farmville, Virginia, which I have a story about. At the Moton Black High School in 1951, there was a walkout led by 16-year-old Barbara Johns. And then she convinced the NAACP to file a lawsuit against the school board. They had initially wanted to file a lawsuit for separate but equal, because their high school was in no way equal to the white high school. They got the rejected books, the worn out books, for instance. But the NAACP said, we're not doing suits anymore with just demanding separate but equal, which was the law at the time in 1951. Because when we win those suits, nothing happens. What we're only doing now lawsuits demanding integrated schools. And so the students and their parents had to decide if they wanted to do that. They did. And they lost in the initial court case. Then the NAACP bound 5 cases together, and they became known as Brown versus Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
And all the people involved, the most of the people, the majority of the people came from Farmville, Virginia, because they had over 100 students and parents sign that initial lawsuit. Mm-hmm. And they lost credit. They couldn't get credit in stores anymore. Some lost their jobs. Barbara Johns' family home was burned down when no one was in it. It was serious, and they knew it. They knew it. So this museum is dedicated to that civil rights action, and it's a national historic landmark now. Just recently, the youth group in the Baptist church, the Black Baptist church, as a result of the murders by police officers, were going to hold a prayer meeting, and they decided to invite the law officials from their community, and the sheriff and the head of the police force, both of whom are white, came and joined them. And I thought, that was good.
Good news.
Good news.
Good news. So this all happens on Things in Our Mail, things on YouTube, and it's stories. And actually, you've given me a juice, Harp, and but I have
You gave me a red nose. Least I can do is give
well,
me
I
a
have
juice.
I have funny teeth. I can't really do it very well, and it's kind of a handicap. I didn't know I had until I tried.
Isn't it more a toothy cap or a mouthy cap? Or?
Toothy cap. Thank you so much for that. That's right. You're going to make a great editor. I'll tell you. Just,
Well, we can't be good at everything.
how are we doing on time?
We have just about 3 minutes.
3 minutes left. What can we do in 3 minutes? Quick story?
Tell you what, this will come out of left field, but that's never happened before. I sat down at a conference. I came in late, sat down. It was lunchtime, and there's two guys sitting at the table. And so I introduced myself. I had my plate of food. They're already eating. And I say, where are you guys from? They say, well, we're at this conference here, but we're from SC Johnson. It was a conference on collaborative work teams. And they mentioned to me that they weren't like executives or managers like a lot of the people at the conference. They were just regular guys who worked on the shop floor in manufacturing. And they told me this story about the boss. This is a family-owned company, and so this is Mr. Johnson. And the story was that a new HR director, human resources director, had been hired. There'd been a search committee, and they'd selected this guy, and it was a done deal. But he had to meet Mr. Johnson, and so he goes up to the president's office, and the secretary says, "Well, have a seat. Mr. Johnson will be with you in a few minutes." And so he sits down, and this gentleman kind of walks by, and he's wearing a sweater like mine, and blue jeans. And so this new HR director says, "Hey, fella, can you get me a cup of coffee?" And the guy looks at him and says, Sure, I'll get you a cup of coffee." And he disappears for a minute, comes back with a coffee cup, says, "Thank you," and this guy with the sweater walks off. A few moments later, the secretary says, "Mr. Johnson, we'll see you now." And he walks into the president's office, and behind the desk is this guy wearing the sweater, and he gets up and shakes his hand. He says, "Hello, I'm Mr. Johnson. I'm the president of the company. I know that you're going to be a new HR director here. Let me tell you, I'll be glad to get you coffee anytime you want, but don't treat my employees like that."
Oh, wow.
And I said to myself, I would like to work for that company. So, I think that's a really good illustration of an organizational story, but it's not one that's being delivered, from the lectern by the president or by the PR guy. It's not something that they're pumping out in their public relations campaign. It's just a couple of guys sitting around telling about their company.
Yes. Thank you, Sandy, for bringing us another facet of storytelling. But now we have to say goodbye.
And it's been a short hour. Thanks so much, Sandy.
My pleasure.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.